Welcome back to Crime in Court. This is the 1996 Menendez brothers trial. We are reading through the transcript, California versus Eric and Lyle Menendez, on trial for the homicides of their parents, Kitty and Jose. We are on the defense's case, part 24, and we still have forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht on the stand. I believe we are on cross now, cross examination, and we just took a break for lunch for the day. So we're coming back on Monday, December 4th, 1995 for the second part of the day. It is week 9 of the trial. So this is the first start of week 9 since it's Monday. And it's the second full week of the defense's case, going into the second full week. And what else was I going to say? It takes about 20 weeks to get to closing arguments, and then it takes a couple more weeks until you get a verdict. So about 23 weeks. But until we get to closing arguments, 20 that's at 20 weeks. I just looked today. So we will have to, we're about halfway done. Almost halfway done. Not quite, but almost. So we're getting there. I told you guys it's a long trial. 6 months was the trial. And now that I'm trying to get these out, scheduled in advance, I think we're getting through them a little bit faster because trying to get them pre-scheduled daily. Anyways, okay, so let's get started. Please hit the like button. And here we go. We're back from our lunch break, and the court says, okay, are we ready to proceed with the jury? Mr. Khan for the state says yes. The court says, let's do it. The jury enters the courtroom. The following proceedings were held. The court says, okay, the jury is all here, and we're ready to resume the cross-examination of the witness. Mr. Khan says, thank you. Cross-examination is resumed. Mr. Khan says, now, doctor, did you also make a determination as to the number of wounds inflicted on the body of Mary Menendez? Yes, I believe that she sustained definitely 9 wounds and possibly 10. And are those? I mean, gunshot, separate gunshot blasts. Okay. And you said that Jose Menendez received approximately 4 to 5 separate gunshot wounds? Well, definitely 4 and possibly 5. Okay. Are you counting when you give an estimate of 9 to 10 shotgun blasts? Are you saying that those were separate shotgun blasts to wounds which you do not associate with each other? Or, yes, that's correct. Right. I'm not talking about, re-entrance or exit or anything like that. I'm talking about separate gunshot blasts with an entrance point, whatever, may have happened thereafter. Right. And do you associate any of the wounds to the body of Jose Menendez with the wounds received to Mary Menendez? That's a possibility. It is a possibility with 1 or 2 of the wounds. So if we total the minimum number of wounds to Mary Menendez and Jose Menendez, as well as a total, and as well as total your maximum, we would be totaling 9 plus 4, I believe, for a maximum, and 10 plus 5 for a maximum. Is that correct? No. For a maximum, 9, and no. For a maximum, in my opinion, 8 and 5. 8 in Mrs. Menendez and 5 in Mr. Menendez for a maximum. And for a minimum, 7 and 4. And if one of those was shared, then it would be 10 for a minimum. So 10, I'd say, for a minimum, and 5 and 8, 13 for a maximum. All right. So that would be your total and the number of shotgun blasts that were fired in that room, 10 to 13? That's correct. And that's just hits. Are you? No, no. Wait a minute. I know there was one through the door onto a tree. I'm not counting that. Okay. Now, in looking at those wounds, you've given opinions. Let's just use as an example the wound to the right arm of Jose Menendez, which appears in Exhibit 295 in Photo B. You've indicated that, for example, that wound is, in your opinion, the large 6 by 4-inch defect, an exit wound. Can you tell us how to make a determination as to whether the wound is an exit or an entrance? Its relationship to a wound of entrance, its relative size, the perceived or logically ascertained trajectory, and sometimes, if necessary, dissection from one point to the other. Usually, you're able to make the determination without laying everything open, but sometimes you might want to do that. Okay. All right. So, for example, we had the opinion. Well, let me ask you this. As far as the wound, which Dr. Golden has deleted from his report, and that is a wound to the dorsal aspect of the right forearm, I believe that you indicated in your report that you do not associate that with any other wound. Is that correct? I think that we had talked earlier today about the fact that it could be related to something that we see higher up in the arm, namely that large defect beneath the right armpit. That's a possibility, but it's something that I can't state with reasonable medical certainty. I still believe that the defect that we see there in the middle picture in the far left column is exit, and the wound described by Dr. Golden in his amended report on the posterolateral, however you say that, aspect of the upper arm was entrance. And by the way, I see that he is indeed probing that on that picture down there, the board that is resisting on the floor. The top picture in the middle column, he's showing us a probe. You're identifying 301 for identification, photograph C, is that correct? Yes, that is correct. Looks to me like he's got a wound there that would fit with 2 by 2 wound that he talks about in his amended report, but which he had not amended in his 89 report. Okay. But my question for the moment is simply focused on the wound to the dorsal aspect of the right forearm. The only one that we see there in the middle. Well, I don't know which one you're. Let me direct your attention to. Are you talking about D? Yes. Of 301? Yeah, yeah, right. Are you referring to marks that appear here in the what appear to be the forearm? Well, I was asking you. I'm sorry. It was your question. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to make sure that I was looking at the right picture. Yes, well, in referring to a wound described by Dr. Golden, not necessarily anything that appears in the photographs, unless you agree that that is the wound that was described by Dr. Golden. Well, that's the dorsal aspect of the forearm. That's all I can tell you. But you do know in the 1995 report, for whatever reason, Dr. Golden eliminates any reference to that wound as existing. Is that correct? That's correct. He says to delete the first 4 photographs and so on. Yeah. So now, in your review of the materials in this case, is it your testimony that that wound, if such a wound exists, could be associated with the wound that appears in 295 photograph B as the entry as the pellet defects to the inner part of the right arm? That would be my second possibility. The more likely possibility is, as I stated earlier, that those represent some satellite exit wounds adjacent to the large exit wound beneath the right armpit. Another possibility is that some of the pellets that went up through the dorsal surface of the right for I wish they would just use like normal terms instead of dorsal and posterior, anterior, all that. Like just use normal, front, back, side, whatever. Like so confusing to me who doesn't think like that. Okay. So through the dorsal surface of the right forearm could have traversed through the tissues and exited there. We just don't know because they were not laid open. Okay, now if you do associate to the extent that you do associate as a possibility the wounds, if one exists to the dorsal aspect of the right forearm with the individual pellet defects that appear on the inside of the right arm, which would you attribute as the entry and which would you attribute as the exit? Well, under that second possibility, which I give less credence to, I would believe that the wounds on the dorsal surface of the forearm that we see in the middle picture of 1B is that that's 301 photograph C, photograph D. That middle picture in the middle column that they would most likely be entrance. And then if under the second possibility, in response to your question, then the wounds that appear to be adjacent to the large defect beneath the right armpit would be exit. Okay. Now, is there how about vice versa? Is that also a possibility that Jose Menendez was shot on the inside of his right armpit and the pellets exited on the dorsal aspect of the right forearm? That doesn't seem very likely considering the position of the body. First of all, in a standing position, it's, of course, impossible unless you have, somebody who is elevated. If he, and I do believe that he was standing, so it's hard for me to conceive how that could have been. Now, in making that determination as to those two questions that I asked you, were you able to look at the wound, for example, and just looking at that wound, say visually looking at that photograph, that appears to me to be an entry or an exit? I cannot. And why is that? Because pellet wounds of entry and exit can be similar in photographs of this nature. They both will have a punctate appearance. The size will be relatively the same, so it's not possible in this kind of a picture. It might be possible with very close pictures showing details of the edges and so on to make that differentiation, but I cannot tell from these pictures. All right, let me ask you the same question in regard to the large defect that has been described as 6 by 4 inches in size appearing on the right arm of Jose Menendez. Are you able to look at that wound and say, just by the way that that wound appears to me, I can determine that that appears to be an entry or an exit? Yes, I can, because it would have to be a wound of pretty close contact. Otherwise, you'd have some dispersal. And secondly, if it is in then close contact, I would expect to see more blackening and searing of the edges. And thirdly, as I mentioned before, its size is such that it is inconsistent with entrance. When you have a contact or near contact wound, the wound is just a little bit bigger than the actual bore with the cylinder. It would be maybe a quarter of an inch to a half an inch bigger. So, if you have a bore that is about a little less than 3/4 of an inch, this could be about an inch and a quarter, maybe an inch and a half. There's no way that I could see a 6 by 4 wound. Okay. So, have you considered in forming that opinion, that an arm could be held at an angle, and if that arm is held at an angle, and the shot column were to strike the bottom portion of the arm, that the shot could cause an entry there and also exit in a smaller portion of the top part of the arm after striking a bone? Well, that's possible. I believe he talked about fractures of the right radius and ulna, the two bones that go from the elbow to the wrist. And we know about the fracture in the humerus. It is another scenario if the arm were held thusly, for the pellets to have gone in to the dorsal or back portion of the right forearm and to have moved upward, making those small holes by large defect. That's why I say that's another possibility that I must consider. All right. Now, when looking at that wound, once again, that we're still talking about, that wound that we're still talking about, In photograph B of 295, the fact that there are individual pellet defects which are separate from a large 6 by 4-inch defect in that photograph, would you say that because these are two different kinds of wounds, that is a large single defect and an individual satellite or individual defects, that those defects could not be satellite entry to the wound if that wound were an entry? Yes, that is correct. If you have an entry, if that, just hypothetically speaking, to respond to your question, if that were an entry, then it is such a size that the pellet dispersal pattern would be quite different. You would not have such a large wound. As a matter of fact, when you come back to a point that permits dispersal of pellets, then the measure entry point, if there still be one, and there can be one, would be considerably smaller. Okay, but have you considered the possibility in reviewing that wound that the arm could have been at an angle such that while most of the shot column might have entered into the large defect, the arm was at such an angle to the shot column that at the moment the column struck the arm, these individual pellet defects might have been closer to the bulk of the shot column than would appear by looking at the arm in that photograph? I don't understand that question. He says, I don't see how they could be closer because that's not a part of the anatomy that allows closer juxtaposition by virtue of bending the arm in any way. The distance that you see between the edge of the wound and the smaller defects would remain the same. There's no way that could change by extending or flexing the arm. It's just not near a joint. And of course, the other point that I made before still the other point that I made before still doesn't go away, namely the large size of that defect. Well, perhaps I can illustrate for you what I'm talking about. Let me see if I can put a piece of paper here. One way if we can imagine an arm held open, if a shot column were to strike an arm in the area of where the arm is bent, it might strike as I'm indicating. Your Honor, I'm going to object to counsel basically testifying. I mean, he's drawing his own. So far, he hasn't asked a question, so until he does, the objection's overruled and we'll wait for the question. Mr. Khan says, let me show you the drawing of two arms. On the top will be number one, on the bottom will be a second. What I'm seeking to do in these photographs or drawings, although I might not draw this very well, is to ask you to envision an arm bend. And because the arm is bent, that the satellite pellets in the shot column might be, let me rephrase that. The spread of the shot column might vary when it hits the arm depending upon whether or not the arm is bent. Is that correct? Objection overruled. Assumes facts not in evidence, says Ms. Abramson. The court says overruled. Um, the witness says yes. Around the antecubital fossa, that crease is front of the elbow. There can be some difference in the dispersal pattern if the arm is bent. Okay, so for example, if the arm were fully extended, you might expect to see a shot column, which would only impact upon a relatively small portion of that arm. Whereas, if the arm is, in fact, bent, what you might expect to see once that arm is fully extended after the shot, what appears to be wider spread of the shot column. Is that correct? Well, yes, I see that's conceivable as you unfolded or extend an arm that has been flexed when shot so that now the vertical dimensions appears to be larger than it actually was when the arm was flexed. That indeed is a possibility. The only thing is that you should be able then to see some lack of symmetry if the arm has been flexed when you then extend it as opposed to conjecturing it, conjecturing it, yeah, that the arm has been extended when shot. There would not be the uniformity of pellet distribution, or there might be a greater concentration at a particular point in that fold. You should be able to see some difference in the expected patterns in a flexion type injury to the antecubital fossa opposed to a hyper fully extended antecubital fossa injury. All right, let me direct your attention now back to the photograph that we had been discussing previously. That is 295B. The injury to the right arm is, in fact, an injury which has both a large defect as well as individual satellite defects. Is that correct? Yes. And isn't it also possible that if the victim in this case were to have that arm extended towards the shooter somehow, that might account for a shot column which would be clustered in large part, causing one large defect, but that once that arm was fully extended after the shooting, you might see satellite defects appearing to be some distance away from the primary thrust of the shot column. No, I would not agree with that, but you see, your earlier question had to do with pellet dispersal pattern. This one now gets into a single large defect, and the kind of gunshot blast impact that you ask about would not produce that kind of a difference, whether the arm had been extended or flexed insofar as that large defect is concerned. Well, why is that? Because you can't change it. You can change the appearance of a dispersal pattern at some crease or fold, but you can't change the appearance of a large single wound of entrance because it is not altered in that fashion by virtue of extension and flexion. You can extend the arm and flex the arm. That indeed makes a difference with my antecubital fossa as I bend the elbow, but extending the arm thusly, flexing the arm, raising it, and so on, that's not going to change the defect in here because, first of all, it's not a joint, it's below the armpit, and secondly, it doesn't make any difference what the angle would be. It's not going to give you a 6x4 defect, in my opinion, that has to be an exit wound. Okay. Just looking at the size of that wound, which has been described as a 6 by 4 inch defect, can you tell us how many pellets passed through that wound? No, I cannot, except I know, of course, that 4 buckshot was used. There's 27 pellets in a shell. So, if a few of the ones that we see, the smaller ones, are pellets, about 5 or 6 of them, then we're talking about 21 or so going through the wound. But it could be less. There could be some still in the arm. I just don't know exactly, but one would just have to subtract from the 27 that one starts with. Yes. But what I'm asking you is based upon your medical experience, uh, just looking at the wound. Forget about the subtraction. Can you say that in order for a wound like that to be caused, I can tell you that there must have been so many pellets? Oh, no, no, I can't do that. And why is that? Well, I couldn't tell you exactly what gauge shotgun had been used here if I didn't know that from other information. 12 gauge, 14, or 16 gauge. I couldn't tell you that it was 4 buckshot versus 3 or 5. I have to know some additional information from the criminalist people who collected materials at the scene and studied them and so on. I can't make that differentiation by looking at the pictures or by seeing the wounds on the body. Okay, well, what I'm asking you, and I'm sure the jury may be wondering, is Ms. Abramson, object to the form of the question and move to strike counsel's comments. All right, rephrase the question. The objection sustained, the comment is stricken. What did he say? What I'm asking you, and I'm sure the jury may be wondering. Yeah, you can't ask that, or you can't say, I'm sure the jury may be wondering. Oof. Okay, so yeah, that was a good objection and sustained comment stricken. Mr. Khan says, when you look at a wound such as this, in order for a wound such as this to have occurred, are you saying that since we see no skin whatsoever in that wound, that therefore the pellets to have caused such a wound must have filled up all the space for which in which we do not see skin? Do you understand what I'm saying? Well, I think I do, but you see, it doesn't quite work that way. It's a blast effect. It's the distribution of the kinetic energy of the blast. The velocity times squared times the mass giving you the kinetic energy, and it is that kinetic energy that blows out tissues. It's not related to the number of individual pellets. For example, if you take someone who's shot with a 38 or a 45 handgun, you get an exit wound that is so much bigger than the bullet itself. That's the blast effect. That's the kinetic energy which is expanding as the bullet moved forward. In this case, shotgun pellets collectively acting as a missile, but I can't tell you. It's not a matter of you lay out the number of pellets and that covers a certain topographical area. Doesn't work that way. So, what you're saying is that although a column of shot blast of pellets may have gone through that particular wound, even if those pellets didn't account for every space for which the tissue is missing, the force of that blast would sort of rip out the skin in between as well. Is that correct? Yes. The blast goes ahead and it tears out subcutaneous fat, muscle, fascia, and skin. Okay. Now, when you see a wound, and I'm not referring to this wound necessarily, but when you see a wound size as the wound in 295B, and you see that in addition to or immediately adjacent to a large defect, there are individual pellets. Is it possible that that wound could have been caused by a single entry shot to the body? Your Honor, I'm going to object. This has been asked and answered. No, unless overruled, you can answer the question. The witness says, unless I'm missing something, I'm interpreting your question to be the one that you've asked me before, and my answer is the same as for the reasons that I gave. The size, the absence of the searing effect, the absence of soiling or carbonaceous deposit. So, for all those reasons, it just does not appear to be a round of entrance. All right, now let me direct your attention to the photograph on Exhibit 301. Here we have a photograph of Here we have a photograph of the back side of the arm of Jose Menendez in photograph D. And by the way, let me hand you the pointer. If you can tell us, here's the pointer. If you can tell us where the elbow would be on that photograph. Looks to me here. Here's the elbow prom promontory, whatever that word is, right here. I'm sure it's a medical term that I'm not even going to look up because what's the point? Um, so here's the elbow right here, right here. There appears to be a bump on the arm right here, but that's not the elbow. That's the break in the arm. Is that correct? Yeah, yeah. I think that that is the fracture. See this promontory here has to be elbow, and this wound up here, it fits the relationship between the two. I think that what it does indeed is appear to be swelling. I would agree with you, most likely related to the fracture. Now, photograph number E is a blow up of the same photograph we're looking at in D. Is that correct? Yes. It is. And here is where I think the elbow is. And here again, that area, which is probably soft tissue damage and fracture of the humerus. Now, does the photograph also show what you are saying is the entry wound? That is, this large hole in the left. Is that what you were calling the entry wound for that shot? Well, no. This now is behind the smaller pellet wounds. So this looks like it probably is that 2-inch wound of entrance on the dorsal aspect. You see, you come up from the elbow, you're on the dorsal or posterior aspect, and then we have these, and then it would appear that the larger defect is obscured from our vision in this picture by this t-shirt. Okay. But surrounding that, if this is indeed the 2-inch defect surrounding that defect, do you see individual pellet defects? Individual satellite pellet defects. Yes, there are some satellite defects, sure. Can you tell us why it is that you would say that that could be an entry wound when it has both the large entry as well as individual defects, whereas in response and concerning the wound to the inside of the arm, we saw both individual satellite defects as well as large defect, and you said that that could not be the entry wound. Well, the first of all, there appears to me to be some black carbonaceous material in this wound, some areas of definite blacking that would be consistent with carbonaceous material. That's one thing. And then the second thing is, of course, the correlation between that wound and the one on the inner aspect of the arm. You have to relate entrance to exit in terms of where they're located and in terms of size. There are also, or there are all, these are all matters of analysis and professional judgment by a forensic pathologist. Okay, now the blackening that you're referring to, are you saying that that would be consistent with some soot or something from the blast? Yes, it would be consistent with that, with what we call soot or soiling. Now, did Dr. Golden, in his 1989 report, indicate that he observed what you are now indicating that you observed in regard to that particular wound? No, he did not. All right, turning to staying with this same wound for a while, it's your opinion then that the wound to the right arm, the wound to the right arm of Jose Menendez was caused by a shot to the rear of the arm and exiting through the front of the arm. Is that correct? Yes. So Jose's right arm was shot to the rear of the arm and it exited the front. So meaning he was probably faced away from the door when the brothers barged in. And is it your opinion well, the front anteromedial, right? The front on the inner aspect, right? And that wound it's your opinion that the way that Jose Menendez got those marks to his chest. First, let me ask you about those marks to his chest. Did you describe those marks as being both abrasions and contusions? Yes, I would call those contusions and abrasions, right? Bruises and superficial diffuse scratch marks. Okay. Now, what is the difference between contusions and abrasions? Let me go through this already. Abrasion is a superficial stretch mark, which goes through the outer area of the epidermis and does not go deeply through the dermis. If it went all the way through the dermis into the fat, then it would be called a laceration. A bruise is something that does not actually cause a break in the skin layer. It is if I could talk, it is an impact kind of injury which causes some tiny blood vessels beneath the skin surface to break and to bleed, and it is a collection of blood that gives you the black, blue, reddish black, purplish red discoloration that we call a bruise. A contusion is nothing more than a bruise. Well, how can you tell the difference between the two? Pretty easily. The appearance is simply that of a bruise and a contusion, and here you even see, look, you see very closely, the reddish purple discoloration at the edges of those areas. That, by definition, you can even see it more faintly here. Sorry, yeah, no, I thought I read the same line twice, but that is the line, and he just cut himself off and said that by definition, and then no, you can even see it more faintly here. That by definition is a bruise, and the areas that would only have a loss of the outer epidermis, giving you that exposed appearance like a bruise, like a brush burn, if you went sliding across a carpet with a bare knee. Ah, ouch, that's the kind of thing that would get there. So that would be an abrasion where the skin breaks, you bleed. So it's a combination of a contusion and an abrasion. Well, how much of that wound, we're looking at what appears to be a large area, how much of that wound would you say does in fact have abrasions? Oh, I think the dark reddish areas are a combination of abrasions and some underlying bruising. If you were to cut into it, which hadn't been done, I don't believe, then you probably would find that there is some blood in the underlying subcutaneous tissue. Not a lot, so that's why you probably have a combination of a bruise and an abrasion. So, are you saying that all of the dark red areas that we see there are all partly abrasions? Oh, they definitely have an abraded aspect externally. There's no question that by definition, when you have a skinning of the outer surface, that's an abrasion. And if my analogy, I fall on that carpet running around here playing basketball and I slip and take a good slip and slide, I'm going to have the abrasion from the surface of the carpet and also probably going to have some bruising from the impact. So I can't tell you how much bruising there is. It doesn't make any difference to me. These are clearly wounds of some kind of secondary impact, and they have nothing to do with the pellets themselves. Okay. So, what you're describing in your example about sliding across the carpet is two surfaces bruising up against each other rapidly. Is that correct? Yes, with some impact. Here we have the two surfaces coming up against each other, and we have the impact as the arm is thrust in a millisecond. That energy force is tremendous, and it just smashes up against the chest. And because it is rough and exposed and might have even had possibly even a little bit of bone, these things can only be photographed with special cameras that they take place in literally milliseconds. You can have even some superficial scrape and some abrasion, and that's what gives you the appearance. If you just take that arm, if we had a body in an anatomy lab or we had good mannequin, which could demonstrate this, if you take it over, you'll see. I can show it here. You can see exactly here it is, an antromedial down from the armpit, bring it over to the chest, and you'll see it's exactly where there in the region of the right nipple. Okay. In the example that you're giving us right now, with your arm across your chest, you're talking about the entry for the shot being somewhere here in the back of the arm. Is that correct? Yes, that's right. And then the exit being right here in the inside of the arm. Is that correct? Yes, that's right. Wouldn't that indicate to you that that man would be shot in the chest? Sorry. No, 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 no. It doesn't. First of all, when he's shot, I have no reason. I don't know exactly what position he is in, but I don't think that the arm was this way. If it were here and then the shot came in thusly, indeed, you could get some entrance into the chest. However, if the arm is just here or just is flexed and it's just straight down on, or it's just straight down on, the impact comes in, but the arm was not juxtaposed to the chest at the moment that the shotgun blast was incurred. It smashed against there, so you don't have the pellets coming on. As a matter of fact, one pellet was found 1 inch to the right of the middle beneath the skin of in the external area. We do have one pellet there, but it is not the nature of pellets. They don't have the kind of force to re-enter and go through soft tissues to any given treatment. So I do not have any problem in understanding how this would have happened without having any of the pellets going back in to the chest. Well, in the example that you just gave of the arm being thrust, that is, hanging first, loose at the side, and then being thrust against the chest, you're saying after the pellets had passed. Then the arm would then bang against the chest. Is that what you're saying? Yes. Are you contemplating that one of those pellets, after passing through the arm, would make a left turn and go to the chest? No, no, no. It doesn't make a left turn. The arm is here and it's shot. And then you have just the pellet that is the most internally directed, then striking that portion and entering it there. Remember, too, that with all shotgun blasts, we also have what are called flyers. A flyer is a pellet that goes a little astray. It doesn't stay up on the herd. It kind of wanders it kind of wanders off by itself. And you always have that. So that's no problem whatsoever. And remember, in any dispersal of the pellets, somebody's in the middle, somebody's on the bottom, and somebody's on the top, and somebody's out here, and somebody's on the inside. So one pellet's got it. it so one pellet got in here. That's not hard to understand. I don't know. I'm just reading what's on the page. Okay. If the arm were, as you were indicating, that is, just loose at the side and the shot were to go from the back of the arm and through the front of the arm, wouldn't that have a tendency to push the arm in the direction of the shot rather than away from the shot and into the chest? No, I can't tell you how the person would move. There's no way to know that. The arm would most likely move whether the person would move the whole arm or whether there would be some flexion of the elbow. I don't think anybody knows that, and there's no way to do an experiment on that. Yet another witness who says there's no way to know how their positions were. Isn't it your understanding, though, as a matter of physics? I know you're not an engineer, but as a matter of physics, if you impart a force in a specific direction, isn't there a tendency to make the object that is struck travel in the same direction unless there's a reason to be thrown in a different direction? Or I think you said direction. Sure. Objection. Well, I'm going to object that it's irrelevant unless the object we're talking about is part of the human body. Overruled. The witness says, that's one. I think of the basic Newtonian principles of laws of physics. However, you see, when you deal with these things on a purely engineering basis, you're forgetting that the human body has movement and joints. You're forgetting that the human body has movement that is controlled voluntarily or even involuntarily by the parasympathetic nervous system. So, that's the problem in trying to deal with something like this from a purely mechanical engineering or physicist standpoint. Some of the concepts indeed are applicable and relevant, but you have to then factor in the biological element, the entire neuromuscular system, and so on, all of the voluntary and involuntary reflexive aspects of it, as well as what somebody sets out to do in this kind of situation. And here, Sir Newton and others just never dealt with those things. They dealt with stationary objects moving in a certain fashion with other objects, strike them, or are struck by a moving object, and that's just a very different situation. Mr. Khan says, all right, now in this situation that you're contemplating here, are you contemplating that the arm would strike once against the chest or more than once against the chest? I think once. I have no reason to believe it was any kind of flapping motion. Nothing here would suggest, or would, nothing here that would have caused that to occur. I think that this is an impact of the arm up against the chest. This guy is a good witness. He explains, I feel like I'm learning. He's teaching me as we go along, and he's just sticking with his answers. He's not going to change his answers, and that's what you want in a witness for your side. You want someone that's not going to be wishy-washy or easily um, swayed to take back some of their opinions, which a good lawyer on either side should be able to try, is able to try to elicit somebody to change their responses. So this is a good witness. And you make reference to the fact that Dr. Golden indicated in his 95 supplement that he does indeed associate the wound to the chest, that is, those remarks on the chest, with a shotgun wound number 3 to the right arm. Is that correct? Yes, he does. Although doesn't he actually say that that shotgun wound number 3 may be rehabilitated to that wound to the chest? Sorry, related, not rehabilitated. My eyes are getting tired, sorry. Yeah, maybe related to shotgun wound number 6 below, indicating that there's entry and exit through the right upper arm and re-entry from right to left, causing the graze wounds on the right upper chest, and so on. That's right. He says maybe, and in my opinion, with reasonable medical certainty, that's what happened. Now, as far as the blood spatter to the shirt of Jose Menendez, I believe that you indicated that the directionality, I think that was your word, directionality of the blood spatter was, as we're looking at the photograph in 295I, from the left to the right in the photograph. Is that correct? Yes, in the photograph from Mrs. Menendez right to his left, as we look at the photographs from our left to our right. Okay. But did you know, but you don't know. I don't know how, like, my brain says exactly what's not on the page, but it doesn't make any sense to me. I apologize. My brain and my eyes are getting tired. We're almost done. We're 45 minutes in. Let me see. All right, so we still have like 30 something pages. I've taken a little break, a little rest break. I've had some coffee, some stretching, and all that good stuff. Not really all that awake yet, but we are going to try to get through this because I want to get through this section. What was I going to say? Oh, I can't guarantee that I'm going to breathe better now that I have coffee, but coffee usually helps me at least feel a little clearer headed. I have really bad brain fog today. I do have clary sage and bergamot, one of my favorite combos. If you're interested in the essential oil type thing, I've got a diffuser here in the background, and that's what's in there. Clary sage and bergamot essential oils. All right, coffee. Mm, not hot, but I needed a big old swig of it. Okay, let's continue where I left off. Sorry about that. No, sorry, Mr. Khan says, right? Mr. Khan, I think, is the one doing the questioning here. I'm pretty sure. Okay, but you don't know from looking at the photograph whether the blood, those particular spatters, was the blood of Jose Menendez or the blood of Mary Menendez. Is that correct? That's correct. If you're asking me, was that blood typed by the crime lab to differentiate between the two people who were not? The answer is no. To my knowledge, none of the blood spatters were tested to decide whose blood they belong to. So any blood that was at the crime scene, it doesn't, while it's helpful kind of for the reconstructionists, for the forensic pathologists and whatnot, it really isn't helpful because it wasn't tested. So you can't say, well, this spatter came from Mrs. Menendez, therefore I think that this angle, she was shot at this angle from this distance. You can't do it. You still, like, again, it's another one of those, well, we don't know a lot of things about the crime scene, and because of that, you just cannot reconstruct it. Okay. And just based upon your own experience in looking at the photographs, you can't tell us whether that blood was the blood of Jose Menendez or Mary Menendez. Is that correct? I like how he points it out like it's this guy's fault or this guy's problem. Like, no, you're the state. You should have tested it. Anyways, his answer is, well, in looking at the blood, obviously the answer is I can't differentiate blood. But looking at the shirt and looking at the wounds, I have no reason to doubt that it was from Mr. Menendez. If there were any questions about whose blood, that was something for the crime lab people to have done. Now, you said that is it your testimony that that you associate the wound to the left elbow, or possibly associate the wound to the left elbow of Jose Menendez with the wound to the breast of Mary Menendez? I said that's one possibility. I can't state that with reasonable medical certainty, but it indeed is one plausible scenario for those two wounds. I just don't know. And I believe you said that you disagree that the shot to the left elbow of Jose Menendez could also have caused the shot to the right arm of Jose Menendez because the shot column? I believe you said once it had been dispersed, is not going to group back together again and strike the right arm of Jose Menendez. Is that correct? That's correct. I mean, duh. That's correct. That's not how physics works. Was it your understanding, based upon the testimony of Dr. McCarthy, that that is what he was saying, that that is what happened in this case? I'm trying to remember how Dr. McCarthy put it when he was asked on cross-examination. I'm not sure what his exact answer was. Something about one portion of it could have spread and another portion could have stayed together or something like that. That's the best of my recollection. Well, is it possible? Is it possible that some of the shot which struck the left arm of, or some of the shot that missed the left elbow of Jose Menendez went on to strike the right arm of Jose Menendez, causing the large defect in the right arm of Jose? No, no, it's not. You see, if you have the dispersal pattern here, at the left elbow, then you're already dealing with something that has been fired, from some distance. I don't want to get into exact, but intermediate. Usually with dispersal pattern, we're talking about 9, 10 feet, somewhere like that. So anyway, you've got that dispersal pattern here. See, there's no way that you can have such a big defect over here. Again, I don't want to repeat everything that I said. Number one, you're not going to get that kind of defect at all. Number two, you're certainly not going to get it from some distance, because where you have dispersal, but you still have some entrance wound of some size, it's going to be smaller. It's not going to be bigger. You're still You'll still have a cluster of the pellets remaining together to give you some irregularly shaped hole. Could be half an inch, 3/4 of an inch or so on, along with some satellite dispersal. That indeed is possible, but you're not going to get dispersal and a big gaping defect. That's just not the way the shotgun blasts work. Okay. Now, as far as the dispersal to the left elbow of Jose Menendez, do you know what was the area in which that particular spread encompassed? You mean area of his anatomy or area of the room? Or I don't know what you mean. No, no, I'm talking about for the shot that struck the left elbow of Jose Menendez. Do you know how wide on his elbow that dispersal was? He tells us, Dr. Golden, from 14 inches from the top of the shoulder to 15 and 1/2 inches below the top of the shoulder. So we have a spread of 1.5 inches. He says below that the approximate spread of the defects are 2 to 1.5 inches. So going with what he tells us, there are 1.5 to 2 inches is the spread that he measured. So that was Dr. Golden's measurement. Okay, the approximate spread of the defects you're reading on page 6? Yes. Approximate spread of the defects are 2 to 1.5 inches. Yes. I believe you indicated that based upon your view of that wound, your understanding of that wound, that that was fired from a distance of 9 to 10 feet. Is that what you're saying? Well, To get that kind of dispersal pattern with a spread of a couple inches could be a little bit less. It's an intermediate wound. I'd say you're certainly talking in excess of 6 feet. That would be a minimum. And then more and more likely around 8 or 9. It's something like that. So he disagrees with, I believe, Golden, who said 10 feet. Before you formed an opinion concerning the distance at which that shot might have been fired, in order to form an opinion that you do not associate it with the wound to the right arm of Jose Menendez, did you consult with an expert in shotguns such as Dwight Van Horn? I have not consulted with Mr. Van Horn. I have my own experience, ya jackbutt. I have my own experience. I don't need to consult another firearms person. I have my own firearms experience to deal with in terms of shotgun wound dispersal patterns and my own knowledge of the forensic pathology literature on shotguns. As I said before, each and every weapon has to be checked itself if you want to know more precisely about that particular weapon. And that's what Dr. McCarthy even said, that you need the weapon itself, right? Didn't he? I think. He was very wishy-washy on his testimony, so it's hard to keep track. I'm just giving you generalities, and that's why I say, 6 to 8 feet or so. I'm not telling you exactly to the foot, but if you're going to get dispersal pattern, then you're usually beyond 6 feet. And so among the experts that you consulted in this case, you were not asked to consult with Dwight Van Horn in particular, is that correct? No, and you made no effort to do so? I was not asked to, and I did not call Mr. Van Horn. He's acting like this is some kind of gotcha. Who cares? And did you read the testimony of Mr. Van Horn? No, I have not. And would you disagree with the opinion of Mr. Van Horn called by the defense that if he were to be shown a shotgun pattern and he didn't have the same gun and the same ammunition, the only thing he would tell you about that particular spread is that it wasn't a contact wound and he wouldn't venture an opinion further than that? Not too different than what I've said. I've said several times today that you have to know the exact weapon, not even a similar model. So, the similar model that the state used to put into evidence to show you what these guns are, that doesn't count. Any similar model, anything that they purchase would not count because it's not the actual weapon. Every weapon has its own thing. There could be like a slight hairpin something difference in it, and then you get a different dispersal or whatever. I have no idea the language that I'm talking about, but you know what I mean. Our witness continues on saying, I've said the same thing, but I'm just maybe going a little bit further. And I think if you were to ask Mr. Van Horn, he would go a little further in saying that he can say that it's not contact, but the only thing I'm saying is that we're beyond 2, 3 feet where you get some scalloping of the edges, but you still have one hole and you got satellite wounds or individual pellet dispersal patterns. So that's all I'm saying. 6 feet, 7 feet, 8 feet, something like that. I'm not being precise. I very much agree with the basic premise that you've got to have that very weapon in the question. But unlike Mr. Van Horn, who would not give 6 feet, 7 feet, or 9 feet, you feel that you have the experience to do that. Is that correct? I would say argumentative, sustained to the form of the question, says the court. Mr. Khan says, well, let me ask you this. As far as the wound that was on the right arm of Jose Menendez, that wound was measured to be 6 inches by 4 inches in size. Is that correct? The exit wound below the right armpit, yes. Okay, and the entry, what is now described in 1995 as the entry, was not identified in any way in the 89 report. Is that correct? Objection, Your Honor. This has been asked and answered. Overruled. You can answer the question. The witness says, the as you had asked me before, it is not specifically referred to, that's right, in the written report. We have only the picture. Now, you found some of the observations of Dr. Golden to be unreliable to the extent that he later changed some of his observations and conclusions in his amendments. Is that correct? Objection, compound, misstates the witness's testimony. Overruled. The witness says, yes, he did change things. Okay, and he now describes that in addition to the 6 by 4-inch wound, that there is a wound which he now says is 2 inches in maximal diameter. Is that correct? Yes, maximal diameter, I think he said. So maximal diameter means that no size or no matter how you measure that wound, at no place is it more than 2 inches long. Is that correct? Yes, that's the way I would interpret that language. Okay, but do you know that when he made that measurement, just from reading the 89 report, you don't know whether that 6 by 4-inch measurement, which he made in the 89 report, included the wound, which he now describes as 2 inches in maximal diameter, do you? Oh, I do know that because he makes it very clear in his 89 original report that the 6 by 4 wound is adjacent to the axilla and on the medial aspect. That's very clear. Medial by the right armpit is quite different from dorsolateral. It's not even close. This guy is smart and um he's a smarty pants in the room, and he's smarter than all of us and uses terms like dorsolateral, which yeah, most and axilla, which most people don't know. The average non-medical minded person isn't going to know these terms. I don't know these terms, so it's confusing. I wish they would just say what it is in like layman's terms or explain it in layman's terms. Like they haven't even done that. He just says words and then doesn't explain them. That's the only thing I don't like about this witness. He's really great other than that. Like he does teach us. I feel like I'm learning when I'm listening to him, but at the same time, he uses these big medical terms that I don't understand. That's just a tiny little critique on my end. All right, so do you think that but you know what, it's not even his responsibility. It should be the whoever's questioning him, and if he uses a big word like that, it should be, Mr. Khan should say, "Well, what is the axilla?" And you also said a dorsolateral. What are those terms? Like he should have them explained for the jury. It's not up to the witness necessarily to go into a long tirade of, this is what this means. It really should be the person, the attorney doing the questioning at the time when the term comes up. So you think that in 1989 he just didn't look to the back of the man's arm? Your Honor, I'm going to object. It calls for speculation. Sustained. In reviewing the reports of Dr. Golden, do you feel that you've had some difficulty deciding what you can truly rely upon and what you can't rely upon? In a objection, Your Honor. What's the objection? It's vague and it calls for speculation. As far as vagueness, do you understand the question? I think so, Your Honor. Okay, objection overruled. The witness says there are some things in Dr. Golden's report that are not subject to a clear, precise understanding. There's some things that were not stated with clarity. Yes, I think that's obvious to anybody who has read these. I don't see how you can deny that. But I think that we have enough to go on here. It isn't like he didn't know what he was doing. He did the autopsy, identified the wounds, and so on. He made some errors. Yes, I don't know, but he did. But I think we can, pretty much put this together in terms of knowing that two people were shot several times and that it's possible to be sure about the sequence. It's impossible to be sure about the sequence and about the locations of these people and the shooters and so on. I don't think that that thought ever entered his mind, and it would not have entered my mind if I were doing these cases. So there you have it. He thinks Dr. Golden still, like, he grasps everything. He just made a few mistakes. And even Dr. Golden, probably wouldn't be able to or would agree with him that it's impossible to put a sequence together, try to determine everybody's locations and positions and all that. Now, in regard to the leg wound of Jose Menendez, I believe that you indicated it was your opinion that Jose Menendez was not seated at the time of that wound. Is that correct? Yes. Now, you also indicated that the last wound received to the body of Jose Menendez, in your view, was the head wound. Is that correct? Yes. Can you tell us any more about the sequencing to the wounds of Jose Menendez other than that he was standing and some time thereafter, that is, that he received the leg wound while he was standing and sometime thereafter received the head wound? Well, I think you've answered your own question in posing it to me. That I think the leg wound occurred before the head wound. Right. What's the point? If I understand what you're saying. Yes, but what I'm asking you is, in addition to that conclusion, did you draw any more conclusions concerning the wounds to Jose Menendez? Oh, you mean the other wounds? Yes. I think most likely the leg wound was the next to the last wound. I think he probably would have spun around then and wound up on the couch, whereupon he was shot in the head. I think that's most likely. And that's what I think too. I mean, it makes sense. So you're saying that first, Jose Menendez received the wounds to his arms, and then he received the wound to the leg, and then he received the wound to the head? I think it's most likely that the sequence was something like that, yes. Which of the arm wounds, two or three or four, the left elbow wound, what that sequence was, I have no way of knowing, but I think most likely the left lower thigh wound preceded the final head wound. And why do you place the wound to the leg after the wounds to the arms? Well, because I think that the wounds to the arms were sustained while he was standing, and I think when he was shot in the leg, he would not have been able to remain standing very long. I think that shot would have caused him to fall over. In this case, it appears that it could have caused him to spin around, resulting in his sitting down with what appears to be a somewhat awkward position of the feet. It just seems to fit. Now, isn't it equally likely, in your point of view, that once he was shot in the leg, he fell down on the sofa, and while seated on the sofa, he raised his arms in a protective fashion and received the shots to the arms? Well, no, because we've already talked about the trajectory of the wounds through the right arm across the chest, and we've already talked about the wound through the thigh and the absence of tissue and pellets on the floor. So, for all those reasons that we discussed previously, I do not believe that that scenario would be workable. Are you saying that the trajectory to the arms and across the chest was such that he was necessarily standing at the time that the wound was received? Well, the big problem you have with him sitting is this. If he's shot in the back of the arm and he's sitting on the couch, it's just hard for me to imagine how the gun would come in over the top of the couch and manage to shoot him. And there's no downward trajectory. The shot is thus, and it goes across the chest, as we have been talking about for some time. It would have to go through the couch, and there's no damage to the couch. If he's just sitting on the couch, it's hard for me to see how the gun could have gotten in there with that kind of an angle. I can't rule out completely the possibility of his having been sitting, but it just doesn't seem likely. The other thing is, of course, if he were sitting, then here again, where are the pellets along the inside of the couch? The left side of Mr. Menendez as he sat on it, the right side as we view it. If he had been sitting and the shot somehow did manage to come into the back of the arm and then out the anteromedial aspect of the arm and across the chest, I would expect to see some blood, some pellets, some tissues over on the inside of the left armrest and inside of the left lateral portion of the couch, and I'm not aware of those findings having been made by the police officers. Well, you would expect to see it only if the trajectory lined up such that the shot hitting the right arm would be on an axis which would terminate into the couch. Is that correct? Well, yes, that's correct. You are aware of the fact that there was blood on the floor in front of the sofa, is that correct? Yes, and that blood seems to be coming down pretty much from where Mr. Menendez would likely have been standing when he was shot in the leg or even from the left elbow wound or so on. It would seem to fit with his having been standing there. So that's more proof why he was standing there. They appear to be right there rather than off on an angle with a shot that is moving with that kind of trajectory that would be postulated necessarily if you were to surmise that he was sitting when shot in the leg. Well, according to your understanding of this crime, which you described as a mobile crime scene and in which there are infinite numbers of variables, couldn't Jose Menendez, for example, after seating himself down, having been shot in the leg, have leaned forward such that the shot to the back of the arm, there was a trajectory which lined up from the shot to the back of the arm down to one or more of the blood stains on the floor, and that could account for the shot to the arm? Well, the problem that you have with that, remember, remains from our earlier discussion that if you talk about Mr. Menendez having been shot as he sat on the couch through the left thigh, you still have that very big question of where did the pellets and tissue go if you just continue with a straight line on off from the lateral outside aspect of the thigh. You've got to wind up with some pellets, some blood, some tissue off of that angle, and it just isn't there in any of the pictures that I've seen. Right. Sorry, coffee sip. So that then, knocks out of the box the component of your question. Why couldn't it have happened that way? Because we can't get past that leg wound to then talk about, well, wouldn't that then, or could that not have moved him forward and could not then have been shot in the right arm. We still have the question of the dispersal of those pellets and that blood on over to the left side of the couch, the inner aspect of the armrest, and so on. We still have that problem. So that's my answer. What I'm saying, doctor, is assuming you're correct, assuming that the first shot was to the leg, assuming that he was standing when that shot was received, isn't it possible that once he then collapsed onto the sofa, that he was shot in the back of the arm in such a way that the trajectory lined up, striking him through the arm and depositing some of the blood that is on the floor because there are so many variables here? He might have been leaning over when when he received that shot to the back of the arm. I see your point. You're talking about if he were shot in the left thigh while standing and then he came to be sitting, could he not have been slumped forward in such a way? Sure, exactly. That the shot in the arm went through. That's a possibility. I cannot completely rule it out. And okay, well, the left elbow is another shot which could have been, most likely was sustained before that, than when he was standing. That's another variation on the theme. I think that I would have to say that that falls within the realm of possibility. He's shot in the thigh. He then falls back onto the sofa, somewhat leans forward, shot in the arm, and then he's shot in the head. I can't rule that out completely. No. Well, let me show you the photograph that's been marked as 183, which shows the shot to the arm of Jose Menendez, and it shows both in the photograph, I believe, what you described as the entry wound, as well as the exit wound to the right arm of Jose Menendez. Is that correct? Yes. And when he wrote his amendment in which he now identifies what he now calls the entrance defect to the arm, does he indicate the distance of that arm from the top of the right shoulder? Yes, he says 6 to 7 inches below the top of the right shoulder. Okay. In the 89 report, when Dr. Golden described the wound that is 6 by 4 inches in size, which he did on page 6 of his 89 report, did he describe how far that was from the top of his shoulder? 9 to 14 inches below the top of the shoulder. Would those two measurements indicate to you that there was some angulation to that particular wound? Yes, 6 to 7 inches and then 9 to 14. Again, with the body in the anatomical position, there would be some downward trajectory. All right. So would that indicate to you then that that wound on the back of his arm, whether that wound is the entry or the exit, that that wound was in fact higher up and closer to the shoulder than the large wound, which is closer to the inside of the forearm? Yes, it would have been, but I just want to share the difficulty. Watch this, please. See, like this. As I am laying on the autopsy table, the answer to your question is yes, 6 is closer than 9 coming down from the shoulder, of course. But now watch what happens. Now, you see it becomes a different measurement with what we call adduction, bringing in of an extremity towards the trunk. We call that adduction. As you have that movement, then you change the location. So I'm just, I don't mean to quibble. Believe me. Again, the answer to your question is could there have been a downward angle? Yes, because 6 inches below is higher than 9 inches, but can I say for sure? And I can't say for sure because I just don't know how the arm was moving. And if that arm were tilted in such a way that it was pointed towards the shooter, and in fact was an entry of the inside of the arm that would also act for the same angle, is that correct? Well, see, you're back to if it were an entry, and well, in your opinion, it's not an entry. I'm just asking you about the angle. Right, right. Now, for the leg wound to Jose Menendez, I believe you said that the no injury to the femoral artery was noted in the reports of Dr. Golden. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. Either in the 89 report or in with more specificity by way of ruling out such an injury in his 95 amended report. In fact, Dr. Golden did not dissect the femoral artery. Is that correct? Well, he says that he refers to the superficial femoral artery and he says he did not dissect the deep femoral artery. And what is the difference between the superficial and the deep femoral arteries? Well, I don't want to get into picking on little matters. There really aren't such terms. So this doctor made them up. Not this doctor, Dr. Golden. We have other names for those branches, but I think I know what he's talking about. Superficial is more, out towards the outer aspect of the leg. The deeper is more internally. So that's the difference. Okay. So you would agree that he used incorrect terms? Well, he using anatomical terms of superficial and deep, and that's okay. I it's easy to follow him. I mean, it's just not the precise terms of, Gray's Anatomy, but that's okay. I understand, and I'm not disagreeing with him or with the point that you ask about. He did not dissect the deep femoral artery. And in fact, didn't he write that although the femoral artery injury was unlikely, it was possible because of the scatter of the shot? He said, yeah, though unlikely, though possible. That's correct. And one of the reasons why you concluded that this was an antemortem wound was because of the bleeding into the wound. Is that correct? Yes. And let me tell you another reason too, is because I do believe his head wound was his final shot. His other wounds would not have been fatal. The wounds of the arms, the two of the on the right arm, entrance, exit, have it anyway for the purpose of this point that I want to make now, and the left elbow, none of that would have killed him. If he would have been lying there for hours unattended, he might have bled to death. But, medical care, what damage there might have been to the arms of a permanent nature is another matter. But they were not fatal wounds. The fatal wound was the head wound. So that's another reason why I believe that the leg wound was antemortem. But he does describe hemorrhage along the entire wound path, and he's very specific in that. Hemorrhage is something that you can see and note, and he tells us that in his original autopsy report, in his description of number 5, the left thigh wound. Well, Dr. Golden also described hemorrhage along the entire wound path for another wound to the body of Kitty Menendez, and then in 95 took that back. Is that correct? Yes, he revised that. That's correct. We all know that he has revised things, but he's not revised things on Mr. Menendez's left thigh wound. Right. Well, though he hasn't, so far, he hasn't revised that. So far, well, now's a good time to have done it, right? But I mean, if he revises one wound by saying previously that there was hemorrhaging along the entire wound path, and now he says that the wound was perimortem despite his observations, how do you know when to rely upon his observations of hemorrhaging along the entire wound path and when not to rely upon his observations concerning? Well, I understand your point, and the only answer I could give you is that I see to his credit, he's trying to come up with a diplomatic way to answer it. To his credit, he did not hesitate to make these amendments in 92. And, I think some people would have been too proud or cowardly to have done it. He did make the amendments. So, I think it's just as reasonable to say, hey, he made the amendments that he felt he needed to do, too, and he did not make other amendments. I mean, what difference would it have made to him then if he had changed his mind to about Mrs. Menendez's other wound? So he stopped where he stopped. And I guess he stopped where he stopped because those are the only amendments he wanted to make. Common sense, right? And I believe that you said that in doing an autopsy on the left leg of Jose Menendez that the femoral artery is something that would have been observable to Dr. Golden. Is that what you said? Yes. I think that it should have been observable to him with the leg exposed as it was in the fractures. With a little bit of dissection, I think that he could have seen it. I think that he would have seen it. And I think you said his failure to note an injury to the femoral artery is an indication to you that there was no injury to the femoral artery. Is that? Yes, that's right. When he says dissection, we know that the artery has a course of several inches. It's not just a small vessel. And I think that he said it wasn't dissected. He might have been saying he didn't dissect it along its entire route. I think he would have sent it in the area, or I'm sorry, I think he would have seen it in the area where the fracture of the femur had occurred. So if it had been damaged in any way, it probably would have been where the femur broke, the where his leg bone broke. So would you also conclude that his fracture to include a 2-inch wound to the back of Jose Menendez's right arm is an indication he didn't see such a wound either? Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative. Assumes facts not in evidence. Calls for speculation on the part of the witness. Abramson says yes. Court says objection sustained. Now, so is it your opinion then that when Jose Menendez was shot in the left leg, you would make, or that would make him, why can I not talk? Blah, blah, blah. Now I'm wired on coffee. Sorry. So it is your opinion then that when Jose Menendez was shot in the left leg, that would make him spin around and then come to be seated in the position that he appears in those photographs. In this particular case, based upon where we see him at rest finally, that is my opinion with reasonable medical certainty. I wouldn't tell you, absent that information of the picture depiction in this case, that I would predict that a person would move in that fashion. I would say that it is certainly logical within the realm of physical possibility that a person could move in that fashion. And so I believe that what seems to fit here is that he does spin around in a kind of clockwise position and wound up sitting in the couch. But are you saying that it may have happened in this case only because you need to explain how somehow he ended up on the sofa? Are you saying that a shotgun blast to the left leg has a tendency to make people spin? Going to object as compound, overruled. I'm not saying the latter. In fact, I thought I had expressed that. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear. I had said that I cannot tell you that when somebody is shot in the leg or the left thigh, that they will spin in a certain direction. No, they might fall to the left or to the right, front or back. No, I can't tell that. I did say, with all of the information that we have here and the pictures that show his final position and so on, that's my surmisal. Okay. What I'm asking you is, are you saying that only because you need to explain how he was shot in the left leg and ended up on the sofa, or are you saying there's something about the wound itself, some evidence about the wound that causes you to conclude that it would make him spin? When you say I need to, I don't need to do anything here because I am not attempting to put together a scenario inasmuch as I do not believe he was sitting when he was shot in his left thigh. I therefore believe he was standing. And if he was standing, then what happened to him? Well, he then wound up sitting and he was shot in the head. And that's how I arrive at that. So, yes, that's my logical retrospective analysis of what most likely happened with regard to the left wound and his final position on the couch. Well, wouldn't the wound to the left leg be, or isn't the wound to the left leg severe enough that it would rather have a tendency to make a person immediately collapse rather than to continue to spin on that leg? No, not necessarily. You could even hobble on it if you felt you had to, dragging it along, or you might just cave in. A strong, big man, which Jose was, can certainly stand on one leg and move a little bit, right? You can hop on one leg. I just can't tell you exactly what would have happened. And again, I freely and readily admit that I put it together based upon his final resting place. Had he been lying on the floor, I wouldn't have had any problem understanding that either. That's he was shot and then collapsed on the floor. Like he was in an upright position at some point and then he's not. So, yeah, logical conclusion. Now, concerning the trajectory of the illustration which depicts the shot to the left leg, I believe that you said that you disagreed with the illustrations which depict the shot to the left leg. Let me show you shot 7A, which is 262. I believe that you said that you disagreed with that picture as depicted there because there was no significant angulation to that wound. Is that correct? Yes. There's a 1 inch difference as measured by Dr. Golden at autopsy. So, would that 1 inch difference between the entry part of the wound, and the exit part of the wound indicate to you that there was some angulation, or would that indicate to you that there was no angulation? Well, just take it as it is. As a 1 inch difference, that's an angulation of maybe a couple of degrees. And do you know if that couple of degrees would place the shooter somewhat closer to the coffee table or closer towards the French doors in that room? Oh, I can't begin to think the shooter could have been over here towards the front of us. As we look at this picture, the shooter could have been behind, but on a more even angle. But again, we keep coming back to where are the pellets and where are the tissue. If he had been shot while sitting, that's really what it comes down to. If you want to, again, just talk hypothetically, what if he were shot when sitting? Where might the shooter have been? And I would just say it's physically possible the shooter could have been on his side, on this side of the couch to the right side as we all look at it, or behind the couch to the left of the picture as we look at it. I can't be sure. I just do not accept the fact that he was sitting when he was shot in the left thigh. Okay. And let me show you another photograph showing you the photograph that has been marked as 299 in your consideration of the evidence in this case and your conclusion that Jose Menendez was most probably shot while he was standing up. Were you made aware of the fact that there was some human tissue that was objection, Your Honor? The nature of the objection? There's no foundation for that hypothetical. Overruled. Were you made aware of the fact that there was some human tissue that was found in the area? See, she knew what he was going to say. There was tissue found in the area indicated in this photograph near the French door or near the entry doors. I'm aware something was found. Gotta love a witness who understands that attorneys can question you and play around with semantics and words and things. And you can just say, nope, that's not how I view it. I was aware something was found there, not a piece of human tissue, which you're claiming it to be, which has never been proven because it was never tested or collected for that matter. He says, I am aware something was found there. To my knowledge, it was not taken in and examined by a pathologist grossly or microscopically, so I don't know that it was human tissue. I'm aware that something was found there, and I think I've seen maybe this picture or another one where someone has circled something. I just don't know what it was. It's my understanding that one of the detectives or police officers or somebody said that he thought that it might have been tissue, but nobody took it in and had it examined by Dr. Golden or his colleagues at the medical examiner's office. Great answers. This guy has great answer. All of these witnesses for the defense have had great answers upon cross-examination. They're holding on to their own opinions. They're not backing down. They are truly, explaining their reasoning and their the science behind their opinions, and it's really beneficial, I think, for the defense. As we know, unfortunately, this jury, it didn't work on them. But now that we know what we know about criminal justice system and how the state likes to hide stuff and be sneaky and overcharge and all those things, we are paying attention to this more and more. Okay, now assuming for a moment that what was observed at the location was in fact tissue in your opinion and directing your attention back to shot 7A, would you say that such human tissue in that area of the room would be consistent with a blowout that you said you would expect if Jose Menendez was shot in that seated position? I would say that it would be consistent, but not sufficient. There's a big key difference there. It could be consistent, but not sufficient. There's not enough there. It would be consistent in terms of its location, but actually, I think it emphasizes and buttresses my point that if you have an evulsion of that left thigh, as you would have had with the dispersal of pellets and blood and tissue, that if you got one piece out there, you sure would have had more of a pattern. You're not just going to have one isolated piece out there by itself. I'm going to repeat that. You're not just going to have one isolated piece out there by itself. So, this is a situation that we sometimes say in the vernacular where the exception proves the rule. If indeed it was tissue, then I think it goes along with my point that it sure wasn't enough to explain all that would have happened as that left thigh evulsed forward or outward. One of the reasons you're saying that you would expect more is because you've concluded that that was an antemortem wound. Is that correct? Well, no. The explosion and avulsion and extrusion of tissue would have nothing to do with antemortem versus postmortem. That's going to happen even if somebody is dead for a couple of seconds. Antemortem has to do with hemorrhaging to some extent. You're still going to have some blood in the vessels. The tissues are still going to be dispersed. You're not shooting at somebody who's mummified. Tissues are still vital, the same as they are 20 or 30 or 20 or 15 or 10 seconds before. That doesn't make any difference for this purpose and the pellet dispersal pattern. So it really doesn't change. Sorry, I'm trying to get the blanket on the dog and she's just not. The blanket's not working. Okay, we're good now. Just from looking at that wound alone, you can conclude on the basis of that uh, you can conclude on the basis of that you would expect to see huge gobs of body materials somewhere along the trajectory of the wound. I didn't say huge gobs. I would expect to see some pieces of tissue, some blood spattering, and some pellet dispersals. Okay. Court says, let's take our recess here and we'll resume at 3:30. Don't discuss the matter with anyone or form any final opinions. We will stop here. This is a great place to stop. I love these like hour and a half segments because it really helps me break it down and get a video to you every day. So that's helpful. I hope you guys like that. All right. I did not mean to click that yet. Just, but I am hyped.